the general tendency. I say we because I'm also more a product of the West, I guess. I was educated, I grew up actually in the US, and therefore make the assumption, and I have learned much more since working in the Third World. We assume automatically that the developing world is going to develop economically and politically.
First question.
Hi, my name is Audrey Martin. I am with Department of National Defense, and I have a personal interest in governance issues. My question is particularly addressed at Mr. Menkorios, and interested in your earlier comments to the effect that the existence of the UN Security Council is legitimate, and the emergence of regional organizations taking an enforcement role on regional security issues, and with that, the possible labor division between the two. With that in mind, I was wondering if you would bother to comment on the recent adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1907 for regional stability in the Horn of Africa and condemning Eritrea's role in supporting Somalia's insurgency.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me deal with the question of Eritrea first. In the Horn of Africa is at war with itself, and unfortunately, I do believe, personally, I'm from there, I have been actively engaged in that. I was Eritrea's first ambassador after Eritrea's independence to Ethiopia. And actually, in negotiating the divorce, but at the same time insisting on negotiating the new relationship also, that the region would be best served if it went towards integration, is what we believed at that time, and I personally tried to work as much as possible. Unfortunately, it was the conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia that really led to a breakdown in the whole area, because even if there was this extremist Islam sort of coming out in Sudan, the two countries worked together very closely with Uganda also in containing that, and it is actually the support that Eritrea, Ethiopia, Uganda did to the southern Sudan that really led to the government of the Sudan agreeing to negotiate. It was a declaration of principles. If you want an Islamic state, you cannot force it upon a non-Islamic, non-Arab population, then you would have to give them the right for them to secede, for self-determination. It was their acceptance of that only when the troops of the southern Sudan actually reached very close to Damascene, which is close to the power generating, in other words, area for Sudan. Well, the minute these two sort of went on, Somalia also, they had a similar position. In fact, I worked in Somalia as representing the head of state, the president of Ethiopia then, as representing the IGAD countries. Unfortunately, I do believe it was this eruption of the border war between the two of them that led to a difference, and Eritrea taking a different position in Somalia. It's a proxy war rather than one supporting one or the other. The problem there, I think, was that Eritrea, just in its approach to fight against Ethiopia, crossed the boundaries of what is normally accepted, behavior, that is non-interference in the affairs of others, supporting, arming Ethiopian armed groups to fight against the Ethiopian government, which Ethiopia is doing also, by the way, to Eritrean groups, but within itself, it is this crossing over to Somalia in support of groups that are a greater threat, that have connections with international terrorism, that led really to a greater sort of pressure on coming on Eritrea. Same thing, I cannot understand why, while you have one fire unfinished, with Ethiopia, to start another problem also with Djibouti. Eritrea says it doesn't have any border problem with Djibouti, and yet there was a border war. And yet they would not withdraw their troops from the border area, whereas the Security Council, as it would in any situation, deal with your border problem through legal means, but withdraw your troops from the border. Djibouti withdrew, Eritrea refused. Well, it is a challenge to the authority of the Security Council. In fact, they said, we've given you 3 months. There's no reason why, when Djibouti has withdrawn its troops, you wouldn't withdraw. They didn't. 3 months passed. We tried actually to say, why don't we give the African Union, which wanted to try to mediate between the two countries, some time. It was increased to 6 months. It was increased to 9 months. Well, then the question of sanctions against Eritrea came as a result of continued warning that it should not engage in support or in defiance of Security Council resolutions on the Djibouti issue. Well, it refused, and that is when actually the sanctions came. If you're talking about would this serve peace and security in the whole region, I believe the threats to peace and security in the region rest both in the unfinished border issue between Ethiopia and Eritrea, where the two countries agreed to take it to court, and whatever the court decides would be final and binding, and Ethiopia, after the court's decision, reneged actually on its promise to do so, and pressure should be put on Eritrea, on Ethiopia as well, to implement that border issue. And the second is this interference in others' affairs, arming actually groups that are causing havoc, which Eritrea is engaged in. So it is pressure on both of these issues, the resolution of these two issues, that will lead to peace and security. And well, the Security Council has simply passed resolutions but not pushed on the question of Ethiopia having to implement the border issue as much as it did on Eritrea.